So I think the knee is one of the most interesting parts of the anatomy to draw, and it's worth just spending quite a lot of time studying it because there's some really complex forms in there and it has a lot of character. When I began to study the anatomy of the whole body, I felt like the knee had it was almost like had as much character as a face in a way once you understand how much is going on there. The first thing to think about though is if we think of the whole body, if I can just get rid of what I just did. If we think of the whole figure, so the head, the rib cage and the pelvis, collarbones, this is our halfway point down to the bottom. The first mistake that we often make when we're beginning to study this stuff is to make the legs go straight down like this, and that makes quite a lot of sense in one way because if you think of a building, you might think of pillars, right, holding up a support, and so it's logical to think that that would be true of the body as well, but it's not the case because with the body what we have is a really dynamic system of weight distribution. So the bone of the thigh comes in quite sharply at a diagonal angle and ends in this very heavy head. And if you look at so it's rather like a block. If you look at the diagrams of the standing figure in anatomy books, you see how little space there is between the knees when the figure's standing at attention like this. And then we've got the curved rhythm of the bone of the shin. So it's quite a dynamic set of forces, and that's what the muscles are going to weave their way around. So if we look at this area in particular, think of the thigh bone, the heavy head of the end of the femur and the top of the shin bone as being kind of two blocks, one on top of the other. That's the first lesson of drawing the knee, because what we often get in our drawings, if we're not careful, is the limbs can be a bit like a sausage, where we know something's happening here, but it's kind of pinched. So we pick up on the roundness of the individual limbs, the thigh and the calf, but we're not so sure about what's happening here, and it tends to disappear. It's very substantial, and so that's what we want to make sure we get in. Now, other things. These lumps on the side of the head of the femur are the condyles. And as I'm doing this tutorial, I'm thinking already I'm going to need to do a part 2 because there's a lot to get in. This is the head of the fibula. And it's a long skinny bone that goes down, and it's the other end of that is your outside ankle. And then on the tibia itself we have a lump here, which is the tibial tuberosity or kneeling point. And this whole surface is the plateau of the tibia. And out in front of all of this is the patella, the kneecap, which is like you can chisel that out of a block, and it's a sort of lozenge shaped form, quite thick, and that is held in place by the ligaments that join above and below. So that's just the bones, and there's a great deal there. So if you look at, say, what portions of those are close to the surface, we're looking at nearly all of this. Much of that, I mean, you can feel this on your own knee, all of this kind of surface just under the skin, and then a lot of this as well, and then this. Now on top of that, we can add another layer, because I want to get some of the fat tissue that's really interesting. So we've got these ligaments and tendons, and then underneath the kneecap you've got like a padding of fat tissue like this. And fluid that's going to cushion the movement of that bone, because the kneecap gets moved about an awful lot, and the knee needs to be heavily lubricated for that reason. One of the things you'll see is when the knee is bent, so here's the femur and here's the tibia, the shin bone. When the knee bends back, the kneecap, the patella, is drawn back inwards, and so it's got fat behind it and below it, but it means the surface form of the knee changes a great deal. So in the front, if we think about how all of this plays out, you get a sense of the kneecap, the bones of the head of the femur, the kneeling point of the tibia, and a lot of loose skin as well, because rather like the elbow, the knee needs to have that flexibility. On the outside, the head of the fibula. We're also going to see the big tendon of the biceps femoris coming from the back. Then the large muscles of the thigh meeting the patella there. There's a flat neutral plane just above. The muscles are lower on the inside of the knee than on the outside. And we've also got the sartorius and gracilis coming around to soften the contour of the inside of the knee, which means that the outside of the knee is straight, the inside of the knee is curved. One one of the best anatomy books that I think there is the Atlas of Human Anatomy for Artists, I think it's called, by Stephen Rogers Peck, because he's got this brilliant way of explaining these complex forms by using comparisons and kind of visual analogies, really. So all of this fatty tissue, padding and so on underneath the knee, he says that's a bit like the kneecap has a beard of fat. So he draws a little face on the patella and makes a kind of beard underneath it, and then that all blends into the bone of the shin. But yeah, stuff like that's so beautiful. But you can see how much there is to get your teeth into in terms of form and rendering on the knee, and this is one of the best examples I can give of why it's so interesting to learn about anatomy if you do a lot of figure drawing, because sometimes, you know, we tend to leave out parts of the body that we're not familiar with or not that interested in, but when you study anatomy, everything becomes interesting, and so you kind of don't skip over stuff. It makes your work stronger, and it makes the activity more interesting for you. You can get more out of it. Okay, so that's it for some thoughts on the knee. I think I'll do a part 2 of this at some point to show you some of this in 3D and show you some examples as well.